Hello, this is Lisa K. Smith with the Exact Solution, and this is just a brief video tutorial on the dimensions needed for us to easily draw roofs in Xactimate. The dimensions needed are probably different than the dimensions you take as a roofer. Xactimate relies heavily on the perimeter measurements. We also need to have the identification of the main roof and subroofs, and it doesn't really matter which roof you designate as the main roof. We just need a main roof as a reference point. And then we need to know the relationship of the subroofs to that main roof. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Including that is eave height variations. And it's not the eave heights from the ground up, but from the eave variations from the subroof to the main roofs. We also need to know three of the roof properties. We need to know the slope, and we need to know the eave and rake overhangs, especially for using the foundation as a perimeter. And lastly, ridge and rafter lengths. And I'll talk a little bit more about each of these now. The foundation obviously is pretty self-explanatory. If you can easily get the foundation measurements of the property, that would be perfect. Also documenting any roofs that overhang from and are attached to the foundation. So we would need any separate roofs from the foundation, say of a porch or a covered deck or something. But we could also use the perimeter measurements of the roof. Sometimes it's easier to get the foundational measurements. Sometimes it's easier to get the roof measurements. And when we're talking about this, we're just talking about all the distances around the edges of the roof. So obviously, if we got the distance around this roof, we'd also get the rafter length too. And that will give us, in case there's not a symmetrical rafters lengths, that'll give us that information which we need. So designating a main roof, and you can see that this property has 4 roofs and they're kind of all over the place. 4 roofs in addition to the main roof. And then we need to have the subroofs identified. So if we identified this one as the main roof, and this is a townhome that has 2 properties sitting on one side of the other, sharing a wall. And this, if we designate this the main roof, then we can determine whether or not the eaves of this one are the same as the eaves of this one, the eave heights. And I'll go into that in a second. This would be the main roof, and then identifying all these subroofs of that, the main roof, from that main roof. The eave height variations, we need the measurements from the difference between the main roof eave, where it begins, and the beginning of the subroof eave. So in this case, this is 3 feet below. We do not need the eave height variations to the ground. It's all in reference to the main roof. And in this example, we have a flat roof that actually covers a cellar that goes into the ground, and the lower part of that roof is 9 feet 10 inches below the main roof, and the upper part is 3 feet below. And then the roof properties that we need, slope obviously is pretty self-explanatory, but we need the slope of all faces if they're different. And so I highly recommend just double checking them, taking a minute to double check them. It makes a huge difference in how we're able to draw this. And especially like on a hip that may have different slopes on each face. When we're talking about even rake overhangs for Xactimate, the rake is the distance that the roof sticks out from on the peaked end, and the eave is the distance that it peaks or sticks out on the side. So eave is the side, how far the roof hangs over on the side, and the rake is how far it hangs over on the peaked end. This little chart is from a scope sheet that I developed, and it helps you capture all that information. So, separating out each roof and providing the information needed for each roof. So the first roof obviously is the main roof. It's a gable, has a 11-12 slope, and the rake is 12 and the eaves are 16. This second roof, the back roof, is a hip, and it has a pitch of 412, and it has a pitch of 412 on all four faces, and its overhangs are 16. So if we just get all these are imperative information that we need in addition to the perimeter measurements. So again, just to go over, we need the perimeter measurements, whether that's of the foundation or of the roof edges. We need the main roof identified, and then each subroofs. And we also need to know the relationship of those subroofs to the main roof, including any eave height variations, whether those subroofs sit above or below or at the same level as the main roof. And the roof properties that we need are slope for all faces, how far the eave and rake overhang, and that's important. That measurement's important. If we're using the foundation as the measurement, then we need to know how far the roof hangs over from the foundation, or it's important if we need to do any exterior siding work as well. And then lastly, ridge and rafter lengths. And those measurements are not always necessary, but they're good to gather more measurements than you need, so that we can double check that we've got the right configuration of this roof. So here's just an example of one roof, and if we were to if this was a roof that you were needing to scope, then we would need to have, again, the perimeter measurement of the roof or the foundation, so just going around each face, and then also documenting the roof line so that we know that this roof, the ridge line isn't straight, and this roof kind of sits a little bit lower than the other roof. And so this would be an example of that foundation and the diagram of the roof lines. Here's another split roof, or not a split roof, but a roof that has rafters that are not the same length as well as height. The eaves are different heights, so we would obviously need that eave height variation. Just if it's just one roof, just designate one face, the main face, call that 0, and then this one would be however many feet above that. And simple foundation, and that would be the diagram that we would need, obviously with the measurements on it. Now this roof is a little bit different. It has a gable, it has a main gable, and then it has another gable that comes out of it, and this is kind of like a hip that goes into both these gables, and then this gable comes out of that hip. And in the rear it has this little overhang over a bay window, and the bay window is not part of the foundation. So in this case we would need the foundational measurement, if that was what you were using, and then the distance that roof hung over that foundation. We'd need that documentation as well. So this distance here, and then the width of that, because we can't use the foundation to determine that. So again, just in summary, we need perimeter measurements. We need one roof identified as the main roof, and then all subroofs. From that, we need to know how they're in relationship to the main roof, and that includes the eave height variations. And then the roof properties that we need are slope, and slope of each and every face, even if it looks like they may be the same. just verifying that. The eave and rake overhangs, if we're using the perimeter measurement that's of the foundation, that's going to be imperative so we know how far that roof hangs over. And then ridge and rafter lengths, so that we have those measurements as a safeguard to make sure that we get this roof drawn as you need it. So that concludes the elements needed for drawing roofs in Xactimate. Thank you so much for your time.